Presentation today, standout college essay, how to start. What this presentation is going to cover is how to start and how to stand out from the very beginning. And it's also going to cover some common mistakes that people make. A little bit about me before we start. I have over 10 years of teaching and tutoring writing experience at the university level. I have a master's in creative writing. I have a master's in education. Over my career, I've reviewed thousands of essays, and most recently, I also received a Fulbright scholarship to Kazakhstan. So a lot of my methods comes from training I received to apply for a Fulbright, and is informed by that. All right, so part one, choosing a topic. All right, so the biggest mistake I would warn you away from is thinking about that you have to pick the perfect topic from the very beginning. This ultimately, if you want to do a really good job, right, it's going to be multiple drafts, it's going to be a process, it's going to take some time. And so almost certainly your topic is going to change by the end of the process and probably even multiple times, or at least change somewhat. So no need to pick the perfect topic. It's better to just pick one and get going. The other sort of mistake or way I'll suggest you reframe, look at the college essay is instead of picking a topic, picking a memory, right? Or memories from your life, right? And writing about them in a little bit, of a memoir style. And so I'll go over that a little bit more later, but that's also covered in the starter guide that all of you should have, but I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So you don't need to come up with the perfect topic, and then I would even stray away from thinking about it as a topic and think about it more as a memory, because ultimately that's what is going to make it unique is your own personal experience. And this is the perfect place to do that in the college application. And I'm also going to talk about more about standing out and being unique in the second half of the presentation. All right, so to begin, I'm just going to give you a few, very simple, straightforward strategies on how to basically just get that pen moving, right? Or you typing on the keyboard. And so these are just basic strategies that you're going to have to develop as you go, but these will help you just get something on the page. All right, so hopefully you all are at least somewhat familiar with the Common App. Um, One component of the Common App that you are able to write about is a list of activities. So extracurricular activities, sports, clubs, dance, music, art, anything you're involved in. You can list up to 10, and then you only have a short amount of characters to describe what that activity is. And so one thing that can be a good idea to do in the Common App college essay is to pick one activity from that activities list and go into it in more detail. And so I should also say when I'm referring to, the college essay, what I'm referring to is the one that you have to submit through the Common App, which is 650 words. And so I'll go into a little bit more about that later, as opposed to the supplemental essays that most, if not all, colleges require. All right, so, but again, just getting started, getting things on paper. Um, Basically, you have to come up with a list of activities, and so you might as well start and do that now. And then once you come up with that list, just listing all the things you've done. And it can be shorter or longer than 10. If you have fewer than 10 activities, obviously you don't have to make things up or anything. And just for the purpose of getting started, if you have more than 10 activities, right, you can go ahead and list those and use them for brainstorm ideas. All right, so once you get that list down, what I would suggest is then you just start writing specific moments tied to each of those activities. And so when you think about the activity, what comes to mind, is there a certain experience that comes forward? And just write, little bullet points, a bullet point for each kind of memory that comes up. Um, that just you don't have to go into too much detail right now, just enough for you to be able to look at it later and know what it refers to. And so that would be the first one. So one simple example, right? First activity could be you play baseball or something, right? And one memory could be a really big game you won, right? And so that's kind of what we're talking about here. And, around 10 times doing that. And so if you can find one of those topics where, you got a lot of memories around it, you're writing a lot of bullet points after it, that can be a good direction to keep developing and write for your essay. All right, so that is strategy one. So now I'm going to move on to the second strategy. So again, in the Common App, right? The Common App does give you a list of prompts for you to follow for the essay. And so I'm going to show you those prompts on the next two slides. And I would suggest another strategy to get started is to just find those prompts. And so you can just Google, Common App college essay prompts. and it'll give you the list. And, you can copy and paste that list into a Word document or however you like to work. And then just after each prompt, write down what comes to mind. And so the other easy way to get started with that is to just copy and paste any of the activities list and memories you listed if you tried that strategy first. And then you can place them after what seems like a relevant prompt. And so I'll go through, a little bit of an example. But so I'll say it's a very similar process to what I just described in the activities list. And I will say that if there's one prompt again where you've written a lot afterwards, more than the others, that also can be a good direction for you to go in for the essay. And the other indicator that might be a good direction to go is if you have the same idea that pops up across multiple prompts. And so nothing wrong with putting the same idea for if it's relevant to the prompt. All right, so here are the first three prompts. The next slide is going to have the rest of the prompts, but so here are the first three. And so I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but I will start with the first one. Some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful, they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. Okay, so this is a pretty general question, right? And it gives you basically four categories that you could write about, right? Background, identity, interest or talent. And for the purposes of coming about just talking about the activities list, the ones that can be easy to approach, right, would be an interest or a talent, right, which is part of the prompt. And so you could consider any kind of activity, extracurricular activity you do as an interest or a talent. And so once again, the first step and easy way to just get started is you can just start about, pick the top at this point, pick the top sort of, narrowed down list of activities that you may want to write about, and you can put them in this section. All right, and so the next question we'll take a look at the lessons we take from obstacles we encounter can be fundamental to later success. Recount a time when you faced a challenge, setback, or failure. How did it affect you, and what did you learn from the experience? All right, and so this can be a good continuation of the first prompt and the activities list, right? Because it's telling you to pick a specific kind of moment, which would be something, related to failure. And so if we keep with the just sports example, it's baseball, you played on the baseball team. Um, you can just think about in this instance, were there times that you lost the big game and were disappointed, or I don't know, maybe got some negative feedback from the coach or got cut or, anything related to that. And so what this prompt will help you do is, get more specific with the sort of topics and what I've been suggesting, the activities you've picked so far, right? All right, so uh, like I said, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I suggest you try and come up with at least, one bullet point to put on each one, and certainly more if they come up. So here's the rest of the list of the Common App prompts, and the only one I'm going to draw your attention to here is the one at the end, which is share an essay on any topic of your choice. It can be one you've already written, one that responds to a different prompt, or one of your own design. All right, and so this addresses one common question that is asked is, do colleges actually care if your essay is unique? And so they certainly are open to that, right? Just by showing you this question that is basically just do whatever you want. And so certainly if none of your ideas fit into these prompts, right? You're not stuck with those. You can just go ahead and do whatever it is that you think is best. So that one is completely open-ended. The last thing I'll say is it also says you can use an essay you've already written, right? And so likely, I mean, unless you have a scholarship essay that you wrote, you probably already have not written something exactly like this, the college essay. But if you do have some piece of writing that you've previously written that you think at least has some sort of potential idea to work with, that is also a potential starting point. And so I always suggest you try and make it as easy on yourself as possible to start. And so if you can think of something you've already written, that might be a good place to start from. Go ahead and do that, right? And you can just start by copying and pasting and then adding to that in a new Word document or cutting if you have to do that. All right, so the next strategy is just using AI, right? Something like ChatGPT. Obviously, it doesn't have to be ChatGPT if you're familiar with these already. And you can just, give it a simple prompt, help me brainstorm, 10 potential topics for my college essay. And, it'll give you a response and then usually ask you some follow-up questions. And so it can make it easy, sort of guided and, personalized, tailored experience to just go back and forth with it and answer some of its questions and generate some ideas that way. And so I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but for these purposes, right, I would suggest you stop using AI after the brainstorming phase. The one additional step you could take, right, is having it come up with an outline. That can be a good idea. Is once you go through maybe some topics, you input some of your own ideas and then say, hey, help me come up with an outline for the essay. That's where I definitely would stop using AI because at the end of the day, the way AI works is it's just gonna give you a very generic essay, right? And most likely very bad, right? And so one question, this is obviously a big topic right now, and I'll address one question that usually comes up is, are college admissions officers who are reading these essays, are they going to be able to tell if you used AI or not? The short answer is they may or may not, right? And then it also depends on how much you did or did not use AI. And so if you just use it for the brainstorming phase, almost certainly, I mean, there's no way, and also nothing wrong, I don't think anyone would say with using it that way. If you just use it for brainstorming, then no, they're not going to be able to tell, nor would they think that's bad. Um, but if you rely heavily on AI to either write the text of your essay or edit the text of your essay, then it's going to obviously be more increasingly likely that they will at least suspect it's AI, which ultimately I don't think is good for you. So I would just avoid having it write your essay or edit your essay at all. I think that's just the easiest way to go. And again, it's most likely just not going to be good if you let it do that. All right, so we've gone over some strategies, right? And so if you really want just someone to tell you what topic to pick, I will give you one suggestion, which is a story, an essay about a career trajectory. And so another obviously frequently asked question is what do colleges want in this essay? What do they want to see? Um, you don't exactly know, right? It's going to be an individual that's reading this essay, and then also the Common App goes to all the schools you apply to. So it's going to be a group of separate individuals that are reading this essay, and you just can't know at all really ahead of time what their personal tastes and things are going to be, right? And so, but the closest thing you're going to get, right? And the closest thing I would say is a sure bet is to think about what do colleges want in general from their students, right? And what is the one thing that all colleges ask their alumni to do is to donate money, right? So they want you to have money at some point after you graduate. And so, they want you to be successful and have a good career. And so if you can convince the admissions officer that you will, have a successful career, or at the very least are planning on, and have an idea and have a plan to be successful after college. Um, it's hard to find a reason why that's a bad idea, right? And so the only objection might be, well, if everybody does that, then it's not going to be unique. It'll just stand out, right? But that's actually then just true of any topic. You could say that about any topic. Is if everybody does it, it's not going to be unique. But, that's why when I work with students and going through this process, right, is I really then emphasize what we're going to start talking about more in a little bit is, and I've already mentioned, right, is the shortcut to being unique is to include your own personal experiences, right? And so only you experience them in the specific way that you did. And so if you're using those moments to build a career narrative, then whether or not everybody also writes a career narrative, you have included unique details, right? That is certainly going to help you stand out or certainly be distinguished from other students, right? So I know this can be, more or less difficult depending on where the student is in the process of thinking about something like a career. Some people may already know, some people may, have no idea, and that's either one is perfectly fine or anything in between. But I would at least try and start with brainstorming career ideas. If you don't have career ideas, I would suggest you brainstorm possible majors, and then you can think about what careers might follow from those majors, right? If I major in chemistry, maybe I want to be a chemist in the lab or something. So, and if you really don't know what you want to major in yet, just think about what your favorite classes were in school, and then maybe that's the subject you want to major in college. And then, once again, then you think about what careers might lead from that major. So if you really just want someone to tell you this kind of safest sure bet on picking a topic, I suggest a career narrative, convincing the college admissions committee that you're going to be successful after college. All right, and so, you know, relatedly, I'm going to suggest to even simplify that even more, right? A lot of times what this is referred to as is a personal statement, right? And so you write something personal, whatever that might mean. And so, yes, it is a good opportunity to do that, but you don't want to leave it to chance that basically the person who's reading this is going to happen to like, or even more important, make them figure out what this personal statement has to do with getting into college, right? And so, of course, you can do it, and if you do it really well, there's no problem. And but what's going to happen is the person is evaluating you purely on their judgment about whether you're going to be a good fit for the culture of the university, right? And so. Alternatively, if you just simplify this and think you can consider this just a job application, right? Which again, college is not an end in and of itself. And so, if you can again communicate that you have some long-term goal, that is going to and show then, and just like a job application, right? You're going to show your qualifications and related experience to prove that you are going to be able to handle the position and succeed and thrive in the position that you're applying for. If you treat it in that sort of job application way, suddenly you're taking it a little bit out of the reviewers' hands, and you're already giving them an argument as to why they should accept you, right? Rather than just a vague personal statement, which may or may not have an argument about why you're going to succeed in college, right? You're making them make that leap. And so 100%, I still am suggesting you write it in a personal way. And so the way to differentiate it would be to think about you are writing sort of a much more personal version of a job application and using your own, going into a little bit more detail about your experience in this essay, but it is with a purpose, which is to convince them that you're going to be successful. All right, and so the last thing I will say in terms of getting started is I already mentioned, right, the starter guide. You should all already have that, and so that is actually going to be the most, you know, personal start out of all the ones I've suggested. Because if you haven't looked at it yet, how that starts is it asks you to think about moments where you experience extreme emotions in your life, and so the reason why I do that is again and then what it does is it takes you through a process of describing that moment in more detail. And so the reason why I suggest it and set it up that way is because number one, if you experience an extreme emotion, right, it's going to be easier for you to remember. It's going to be easier to come to mind and get on the page. And then I take you through a process of just describing that moment in sort of literal detail, what it looked like and things like that. And so again, that should be a memory that you can imagine pretty easily and just pretty easily write down the literal details of what was going on. And then suddenly that gets you a pretty good start. And the other reason why I suggest that is a good way to go about it is because if you experienced a strong emotion, then that moment was important to you, very important to you for some reason, right? And so one thing a lot of people say, right, is in this essay, you want to show who you are. And so if you include one of these moments, you're definitely giving them a big chunk of who you are just by describing one of these moments. So some moments are going to be better to use than others, but it's certainly a very good place to start. I'll say briefly, right? I also offer free, one-on-one online consultations. And so if you do one of those with me, I can talk you through how to get started and brainstorm and workshop your ideas. And a lot of times it's much easier to talk about your ideas before you start writing them. And then once you do talk about them, it is easier to start writing them. Or you can even have someone write down notes from what you're saying, and then there's your written start. Um, and so you can also email me with questions and ideas. All right, so part two of this presentation focuses more on standing out, although I've already, been building towards that and told you the start of that, and so which is focusing on personal experiences, memories, things like that. So I'll tell you then sort of the opposite, some things to avoid, right, is writing about purely abstract ideas in an abstract way, right? You could start writing about leadership, but if it's only your sort of abstract ideas about what that means, what that is, or, examples of, or a book report kind of thing about leadership, right? If it stays very general like that, then it's not going to be unique because anybody could write about some sort of character trait or in an abstract general way, right? So that is not typically easily going to lead to something that is unique. And then here's the sort of other point to make, right? I mentioned the activities list in the beginning can be a good way to start. You don't just want to repeat your activities list or just repeat, like I said, you don't have a lot of room to describe them in the actual portion of the application where you input them. But you don't just want to then, list all 10 and go into a little bit more detail about all 10. One that's just too close to what it is you've already presented them with in the activities list. And then also, you're not going to have as much room to go into depth into any one and get to those real personal specific moments that are going to make it unique. So, long listing of any kind is not good. You want to focus on one sort of experience. Okay, and so I already started to talk about this, but again, the surefire way to make your essay, generic and not stand out is to use AI to produce it, right? And so fundamentally, that is how AI works, right? It gives you basically it analyzes a massive amount of data, and then when you prompt it with words, the basic function is it gives you the words that are statistically most likely to appear next to the words that you give it, right? And so again, it's the words that are most likely that, the most humans have written and uh, as most times if possible have appeared next to each other, right? And so again, by definition, it's going to give you the most common generic thing, which is going to be the opposite of unique. All right, so the last thing here is we have what little bit of a step further, right, than just writing about unique moments is to write about a combination of them, right? And so I'm going to give you an example here, but if you can combine things, especially interests or experiences you have that you think are unrelated, that can be a good direction to go to unique because if it's obvious that they're unrelated, right, then that means that most people are going to see them as unrelated. If you can find a connection and put them together, then that's a rarer thing that you've done in coming up with a new topic, right? And so, just a silly example here, right? If someone tells me they like dance, statistics, and French fries, right? Generally, there's no easy connection to certainly connect all of those things, right? And so, a lot of students, when I start talking about these things are going to be like, well, my interests are so far apart, I can't write about a combination or all of them. There's just no way. But so that is what I help you do. And so an example of combining all of these could be I want to start a food truck where we advertise by posting dance flash mobs um, holding our French fry brand on social media, and I'll use statistical analysis to optimize the marketing, right? And so you're bringing all these things together into one thing, and suddenly it's unique, right? And so obviously then you have to juggle with the feasibility or if that's really something you want to do. But this is kind of another next step into ensuring that it's unique is in combining your interests, right? And so I'll say, in terms of uniqueness, that's exactly what I have training and experience in, right? Is a master's in creative writing. And so what we do there is we help each other read each other's work and give each other feedback on how to make their what almost is always a generic idea or generic story into something that is unique, right? And so it's not a straightforward process. It's not a process that, you can apply some sort of formula to. I mean, obviously that would just defeat the purpose. And so it's just something that takes experience with trying to do, which is what I have. And so if you talk to me, right, I can help you see which parts of your essay and experience are unique and push you towards that direction. And then I can also help you, convey it in a more unique way, writing style wise. All right, so I've talked a lot. I've given you a lot of information and strategies, and so once again, I'm suggesting that if you really want to do a good job, this is a long process, right? My coaching program takes you through 10 steps, right? That I suggest would take at least 10 weeks to go through, right? A draft a week. And so you might question, right, what is the benefit of putting so much time and energy into this thing, and potentially money, right? If all it's going to do is you're just going to use it one time and apply to college, and then once you start or get in, you're never going to use it again ever, right? And so it's just a one-time thing. So number one, obviously, you know, what college you get into can significantly alter the trajectory of your life. So number one, it is just an important thing. And the other is if you take my suggestion, if you work with me and take my suggestion, of treating it basically as a job application to oversimplify, right? Then you're developing a skill that you're going to need to use for the rest of your life, right? Which is applying to jobs. And so any work and all work that you do now is only just going to pay off in dividends later because it's the process that you know how to succeed at, right? And it'll get you ahead of the game. So let's keep moving. So last slide again here is just the benefits of working with me. I can help you get to a unique direction much faster, right? And I can help you stand out faster than you potentially could on your own. Um, okay. And so here's a QR code if you're interested at this point before we start the Q&A session to book a free 50-minute consultation with me where we can help you get started or come up with a plan or a strategy for moving forward wherever it is you are in the process. So I'll also drop this link in the chat here. So that is it. Thank you for listening, and I'll give you some time and go ahead and start answering some questions. First one, when should students start the writing process? I would say as soon as their classes are done, right? Obviously, grades are a big important factor in college applications, and so you want to focus on those when you can. And then so as soon as those end, I would suggest to start writing at the beginning of summer vacation. Okay, and what's a realistic timeline for drafts? I would say no more than one draft per week. That would be a good pace. And so I am suggesting that you spend a minimum of 10 weeks on this. So it's up to you if you want to space it out, and that can be perfectly fine. There's not necessarily any uh, benefit to doing it in just and only 10 weeks, but I wouldn't think you would want to spend less time on it than that. And so just at most one draft per week. All right. So what if my child picks the wrong topic and wastes time? These are all kind of similar. Isn't it risky to just start writing without a clear topic? What if they go down the wrong path for weeks? How do we know when to commit to a topic? All right. And so if this is something that you're particularly worried about, right? That's why I would just suggest picking the career narrative trajectory, right? And try and settle on a single career to write about. And then just focus on that as you go through and finish the essay. I mean, if I would love to hear the objections to writing a career-based narrative, um, because I still just think it's the safest way to go, right? And so the other thing to consider that, right, is if you immediately just pick the career trajectory and start writing that topic, you're not wasting any time. And then once you finish it, you feel like you finish it if you've started early, then you still have time and even significant amount of time before the deadline. Then you can explore other ideas, right? And and the worst thing is you don't like any of them, but then you have the career narrative already finished, and then you can just upload that. And so getting one finished and getting that one finished, you know, as soon as possible can relieve some stress around the whole process, right? All right, so these are about AI, which I already addressed a little bit, but mm, so one question is, can you have it edited? And so again, I would say no. I mean, the other reason why you don't want to do that is because again, it does have its own style, but and so that is when it can become easily identifiable. And also, there's no guarantee that it's grammatically correct, right? It's analyzing, a ginormous amount of text. And so, would you think that most text that most people write, the most common stuff, is grammatically correct or not? You would expect certainly there would be some mistakes. And so if you just had, ChatGPT edit your essay at the end, you can almost guarantee that something is going to be incorrect, right? Which may or may not be a huge issue, but you certainly kind of know that for sure. And then again, it's just going to, dampen your voice and, make it very generic and just not be good. All right, these questions, let's see. Can you show an example of essays that worked? Yes, and I can just put that. I'll take a link from my website and put this example in the chat. All right, and so this link right here will take you to an example of an essay that was produced by the 10-step, career trajectory process that I use. And so you get to see the first draft where it started all the way at the beginning, all the way to the final draft. And that website also gives you some sort of commentary on that. All right, let's see other questions. What's the difference between a good essay and a great one? Okay, so I would say, there's no easy answer to this because again, there's going to be individuals reading this, and so individuals are going to have uh, different ideas about what is a great one. And so I would say pretty much you're guaranteed to get a good one if you write the career trajectory. Again, I'm going to say that a lot. Um, and so if you kind of just put minimal effort into that, right? But still do it and complete it. I think it's going to be hard to say it's not good, right? If you follow the process I'm suggesting. Now, could it be better? Yes. And then one question would be, how do you know if it is a great essay? I would say it's when you feel it's going to be great, right? So I'll say because you don't know exactly what the readers are going to want, are looking for, or think is great, then what you should by default lean towards is just writing what you think is right and then what you think is great, right? Whatever that means. And so certainly you'll want to go to outside readers and get opinions. You can work with me. I obviously can tell you if I think it's great or not, and that would be another way to go. But what I think is great, the uh, at least some of the admissions committee, it may not think it's great, or it may not just be right for the university, right? They may have their culture may emphasize something much different. And so that might be they're looking for something very specific. But ultimately, I would suggest you don't write to unique specifics about a particular college in the Common App essay because it's going to all the different colleges. So you certainly wouldn't want to, say put one college's name in there. I definitely want to go to Harvard or something. Then everybody else in that's getting that essay, gets put off by that. So I would say that's definitely a way to sort of limit your chances there. So don't do that. Another related question, is a unique topic more important than strong writing? So I would say that strong writing can make anything unique, right? And so again, that kind of gets into the question of a great essay. And so again, those are going to be uh, personal judgments, subjective judgments about what it is that's really strong and unique. And the other thing I'll say that I didn't finish is why I suggest then you just go with the truth, right? You just go with what actually happened to you, what you actually think and feel and believe, and write it in a way that you think is strong and great, is because the colleges will be selecting you on that sort of judgment. And so if they like who you are and the truth, you're more likely to be a good fit and succeed and do well and enjoy that college. If you tend more towards lying and say, trying to just say what you think someone wants to hear in the essay, what can happen is, yeah, you may get in, but then that's actually not truly reflective of you, and you could be put in a position where there's going to be conflict and tension. You don't actually align with the culture of that university, whatever it may be. So that's why I say, at the end of the day, you don't know, and so you have to just go with the truth because that's going to be the best fit. All right, this is a good question, a common question. Do you need something extraordinary like a big achievement to write about? The easy answer is no. Then I will say if you do have a big, impressive achievement, right, you certainly want to consider writing about that, right? Because that might look good. But that also may not be, if you won some national competition or something, yeah, you're definitely going to want to consider writing about that. But number one, it could appear, I mean, it's going to appear somewhere else in the application. You don't necessarily need to repeat it if there's nothing, much more to say about it, or if you have an experience that just better aligns with what you're trying to do. So 100% you don't need some sort of big achievement. Especially if, again, you do something like the career narrative, right? Which is you're telling them you're going to, have some big achievement and success. And I'll say quickly something I didn't mention, it doesn't necessarily have to be, money that you're trying to convince them that you're going to be successful with. It can just be, something prestigious or just anything that's going to look good. Uh, to represent the university, right? So it doesn't have to be money. All right, so more questions. How much does the essay actually matter in admissions? Okay, and relatedly, can a strong essay make up for weaker grades or test scores? Okay, good questions. I mean, the short answer is yes. The middling answer is that we don't know exactly how it's going to play out, and you'll never know exactly, how it factored in. Um, But certainly, if you think about it, if on paper the rest of the application is a tie, right? What are the main components of the other parts of the application? Your GPA and standardized test scores, your SAT, ACT. If two students are tied, they have exactly the same numbers. What is going to be the tiebreaker? Well, it's whichever essay they like, right? So in that situation, yes, the essay definitely matters. The other thing is, can it make up for weaker grades or test scores? And so I would still suggest the answer is yes, but I would still suggest there obviously are limits to that. And so you want to, any college that you're thinking about applying to, you want to go see what range numbers that they typically accept. And so if the range is whatever the range of numbers is, they accept, the lowest GPA they accepted was this, the lowest test score they accepted was this. Um, if you're just below that, right, then yes, that essay can make a difference and make up the gap, right? Especially if there is some sort of reasonable, extenuating circumstances that, prevented you from performing to your highest ability, right? And if that is the case, then yes, that actually is a very good thing to write about in your essay, is to try and explain that and just give the argument about why those should be viewed a little bit differently. And so, and then similarly, if you have the minimum GPA and test scores, but you're on the lower end, you're less likely to get into that university. But again, a good essay can sort of push you up the stairs, right? And so it can either at the top break some ties, or lower, it can help you, jump up a few pegs. Mm, okay. Okay. All right. So this is a good question. One thing is, how much should parents be involved in this process? And so I would say the easy answer is certainly stop short of writing it for them, right? You want them to be judged on their own work, and like I was saying before, if they're a good fit for the culture of the university. And so if you have anyone else write it, which includes a parent, you run the risk of it just not being authentic and not honestly reflecting who you are. And then you're going to end up in potentially a worse place, right? So any number of reasons why you certainly want to stop short of writing the essay for them. So, barring that, I don't think there's exactly an amount that's too much, right? If you're going to help them brainstorm, if you're going to read it and give them feedback, right? As long as you don't then actually write the essay for them or really try and dictate what you think the best idea for them to follow is, I would say that's fine, right? And so then also the other limit there is going to be obviously your child and how much they're going to let you be involved in the process, right? And so potentially that maybe not at all, right? But you got to do the best you can. And one of the questions is, what should you be doing now versus later, right? It is a little, it's on the earlier side of this process, right? I suggest a student starts writing once summer vacation starts as soon as possible. And so certainly, obviously, if this is something on your mind and a concern, just educating yourself as much as possible about the process and what it means and what it can do, I think is exactly what you should be doing now. And then if you educate yourself as well as you can pass as much of that knowledge as you can to your child. Uh, How do I know if my child is on track? So, all right. So at the other end, ideally, I would say you feel like you finish the essay before the fall semester starts. So I suggest you start as soon as possible at the beginning of summer vacation, and then ultimately, hopefully, you end by the end of summer vacation before the fall semester starts. Because again, at that point, you want to shift most of, if not all, your focus back onto getting good grades. And so hopefully you don't need to work on the essay because that's just going to be more distracting. I will say, the deadlines aren't until the early deadlines, early decision, early action stuff is November, about November, and then the regular deadlines can, start as soon as December. And so if you wrote it in the summer, it can be a good idea to review it, at least once before you finally submit it, right? It can be good to put a little bit of time in between when you wrote it and when you turn it in, because you'll see it from a little bit more of an objective perspective and maybe make some tweaks. But certainly, if you're close to the deadline, I would move away from making substantial changes. All right, so this is good related to kind of a series of questions of, can my child just use school resources, or just use AI or online guides, right? What's the difference between my help and a teacher's help? They're one of their teacher's help. And so I will say 100% you want to generally, as much as possible, use the resources at your school as much as you can. Obviously, depending on the school, but at, most schools, resources are spread pretty thin and they have to work with a large number of students, right? And so they can't give you as much individual time. So I would say they're good, sometimes great, depending on how good they are. Resources, specifically for telling you the kinds of things, right? Like what is the range of GPAs and test scores that this college I'm thinking of, usually accepts? Am I a good fit, for sort of the numbers on paper stuff, right? I think that's a good use for them because, we're just talking about numbers. Is two greater than one? And so they have some more experience how that's applied to college, and it's a pretty straightforward, question. Um, so so then I would suggest, can you just use online resources? I would say yes, you definitely want to look online, including AI, which is what I've suggested. You do want to stop at some point because obviously there's an infinite, basically, especially if you use AI, an infinite amount of content that you could consume related to the college essay, right? So certainly at some point it's going to be a question of when do you stop. And then the other problem you might run into is you're going to get a lot of conflicting advice, right? And so ultimately, if you do feel that, you're looking into it and a lot of different things, and you're getting conflicting advice, well, just pick the one that seems right to you. Because again, you want to represent yourself authentically so that you get into a place where you are a correct fit culturally. So go with your own opinion on that ultimately. Let's see. All right, so a teacher's help can use a teacher to do this if they agree to it, right? I was a teacher, I was a high school teacher. Reviewing college applications is the job of the college counselor, right? And it's, at least for me and, everybody I know, it's not in the job description to help students with college essays, right? And so, number one, they may say no, number one, and then number two, if they say yes, they may have no particular training or expertise or, be any more help than someone else. And so it's obviously if you know the teacher that they do a good job and has some experience in this and they're willing to sort of go the extra mile with you 100%, use them. But it's not likely that that's going to be your best choice. Certainly if they agree to just read it and give you feedback, I would say that's good. Or if you can get them to, edit the grammar and stuff, that can be a good idea. Okay, so yeah, I mean, what makes me different is I have a lot of training and experience in this sort of specialty, right? And I don't have, other than, the students that I accept to work with, which is capped, right? I don't have anything else distracting me from working with you. All right, let's see. Okay, this is a good question, and we're nearing the end. Mm, so obviously you have to jump off. I would, feel free to do that. But then, yeah, I'll follow it with some emails. Hopefully, don't annoy you too much. But I would suggest a good next step would be either email me, reach out to me directly, tell me a little bit about your situation, where your head is at, or book a free consultation. Then we can talk a little bit more about your particular context. But anyway, so I'll just go and keep answering these questions. All right, what if my student struggles with writing? Can this process work for average students? Things like that. And so I will say the short answer is yes. I will say, I am not only uh, basically offering remedial help. And so some people are going to say, well, my child's a strong writer, right? They're not going to need help. Well, it's not necessarily true. And so at the very least, I'm almost better prepared to handle students that are strong writers and take them to basically the next level. But I can do the same with average or struggling writers. I mean, particularly because my general philosophy is that in writing these essays, you want to write towards sort of the middle and use and be simple and straightforward. And so that doesn't take any sort of unique ability necessarily, other than the very basics, right? And so as long as you can do that, I can help you write a better essay. Mm. How much guidance do they actually need? So again, that's going to vary, but one way to think about it is uh, you should think about this like the amount of work, how much work is this? I would say if you want to do the best job possible, you should think about it at least as you're taking, a summer course in this, right? The same amount of work you would put into a course during the school year is basically the same amount of work you would want to put into it in the summer, however that plays out. Yes. Mm. These are kind of related, but I'll still go with them. Is it okay to write about something common? Yes. Like I mentioned before, it's strong writing can, make anything stand out and good. And sometimes writing about some of the most common things can be good because then they're relatable, right? But if you have a unique perspective on them and showing someone something new, then that can be a good way to stand out and display, high quality. How do you actually find those unexpected connections? Like I said, there's no exact formula, right? But just try and get everything on paper, write that activities list and then look at your courses and things like that. And you just try and start combining things, right? Take two things that don't look like they fit together. Um, I suppose at that point you could even use AI, right? I mean, I would say the best thing is to talk to someone like me, but you could certainly in the initial stages say, hey, I'm interested in the example I used earlier, dance, French fries, and statistics, what sort of unique combination does that lead to? And I would still then ask the question of what kind of unique career does that lead to give it a little bit more focus. But the more open-ended you want to keep it, then the more sort of um, idiosyncratic the process is to you and your own sort of judgment. So I would say either talk to someone like me, or initial stages, ask AI if there's some combination. And so I'll also say if things are just the other thing that might have to happen, right, is you have two things that are very far apart on your application. You have your love of French fries and you also like dance. If you don't want to open a food cart that has, dancing related marketing, if that's not something that actually, appeals to you or stands out to you, don't use it. I'm not suggesting that you lie or try and force something in. So that is the other check on this process of combining different elements, is what actually sounds appealing to you. And so if you have two things that produce something that you don't like, then you want to even lean towards leaving that element that you're not interested in off your application. So obviously if it's course, you can't, leave it off. They're going to get your transcript. Um, but if it's an activity that you're not as interested in, and certainly if you're over the limit and you got to pick certain ones, right? Pick the ones that are most interesting to you, and then potentially just completely leave off things you determine are unrelated. All right, so why can't my child just do this on their own? So 100%, obviously they can. One thing to consider, right, is these kinds of services, coaching services, have only been, increasingly used. And so whether it's fair or not, one thing you're going up against is just a greater proportion of other students that are going to use these kinds of services, right? And so it's basically the same question as should I do a SAT prep course, right? Those are pretty standard now, and those ultimately are kind of offered by typically standard, to offer somehow through the high school or be hosted at the high school, at least something like that. And so it's the same question of essay. Should I take a prep course, to do this? And so I've heard, I don't know what the proportion is, some high schools are starting to, have the students write their college essay in their essay class, which can kind of give you an idea of how important, the education system thinks this is. All right, so we're gonna stop there. That's all the questions. But again, if anything comes to mind, definitely email me. I'll put my email in the chat here. So feel free to email me any questions, and then also you can book a 50-minute consultation, and we can talk about it, or you can ask me about that, obviously, when you email me. All right, so thank you everybody for coming. Good questions, and I will talk to you soon.